Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Anthony Zaragoza, and I would like to welcome you all to a double inaugural lecture. This is the first lecture in the Neoliberalism in the Neighborhood Speaker Series, and the first lecture of the Resilience Studies Consortium Partnership Site Visit and Collaborative Learning Opportunity. This lecture will be shared with partner colleges and universities in the Resilience Studies Consortium. So to our online viewers, welcome to the Evergreen State College Tacoma campus. So, as you all know, we've been using this term neoliberalism throughout the quarter and even last year. And so I want to offer a brief definition and allow our guest speaker to go into it in more depth. But first, let me say that since the early 1970s, the U.S., like countries around the world, has experienced a process of enormous economic restructuring. This restructuring has resulted in a massive growth in inequality, enormous increases in so-called free trade, acceleration of climate change, deindustrialization across the country, financialization of the economy, and the development of global economic governance through the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and WTO, the World Trade Organization. Around the world, people have challenged these policies while seeking to move in a different direction. The term neoliberalism is used to describe the package of economic policies, political priorities, and ideological justifications that create these changes. Some of these changes have names that we recognize a little bit better in the US, that sound familiar to us, such as downsizing, welfare reform, Reaganomics, deregulation, privatization, gentrification, budget cuts, austerity, financial crisis, tough on crime, emergency management, among many others. The changes from neoliberalism are noticeable in how the structure of things around us has changed and is changing. And we can examine and research these changes in our very own neighborhoods. Neoliberalism in the neighborhood is a pedagogical approach to study neoliberalism on local scales while connecting them to national and global changes. So as part of the Neoliberalism in the Neighborhood Speaker Series, we here at Tacoma will be inviting folks from across the country to share with us how these economic policies are impacting them in their communities. For this lecture, we are partnering with the Resilience Studies Consortium, the RSC. The RSC seeks to utilize a nationwide network of colleges and universities in order to advance place-based educational opportunities for undergraduate students from a diverse set of backgrounds and passions. The Tacoma campus became a founding member of the consortium this year. This network includes 6 schools across the country, including Roosevelt University in Chicago, Kansas Wesleyan, and the hub of it all at Western State Colorado University. Our guest this evening, Andres Esparza, will talk more about this network and the schools that are combined to form it, and what it offers you as students here, and get us thinking about what we have to offer the RSC. I'd like to provide a special thanks to John Hausdorfer and the good people at Western State Colorado University and the Resilience Studies Consortium for helping to make this possible. Andres Esparza, our guest speaker tonight, is a faculty member at Western State Colorado University, where he received his master's in environmental management, and where he now teaches environment, sustainability, and sociology. He's also the Resilience Studies Consortium coordinator, which means he comes around to the various schools in the network to learn about our work and think about how we can benefit from other schools in the network. I'm proud to say that Evergreen Tacoma is his first stop. Andres has been an educator for nearly 10 years in environmental education, working with youth-based education, and then later bridging with community education around environment. For him, this work starts with his love for public lands and being outside. The overarching idea, he has told me, is being able to engage all segments of our population as we think about our public rights as residents of this land. Please join me in welcoming Andres Esparza.
Give me a moment to get this set up, and we'll go. How's it going? All right. Seems a little weird talking into mics to a few of you, but for recording purposes, I'm going to keep this on. Thanks so much for having me here tonight. My name is Andres Esparza. I'm coming from Gunnison, Colorado, Western Slope, rural town. You know Gunnison? No way.
Yeah, my aunt's from that area, and she lives in Cimarron right now.
Oh my God, Cimarron. That's even tinier.
Yep.
That's like a dot on the highway. Oh my God. All right, cool. All right, well, it's a little slice of heaven. I went to grad school there, just graduated with my master's in environmental management, and now I'm teaching at the university. And I'll go into my roles as RSC coordinator a little bit and my personal research. But for today, I'm guest lecturing, and the title of it is Neoliberalism on Our Public Lands. A lot of the focus of your studies here, this session, this block, is neoliberalism in the neighborhood. My background is looking at public lands, national parks, Forest Service, BLM units, and the way that we connect with them, whether we go hiking or skiing, our connections to the land, our environmental ethics, and how that's changing in a new cultural landscape. So neoliberalism on our public lands, natural resources, changing demographics, and the neoliberal agenda, how it all ties together. One of the parts of the RSC is really taking what each university has and specializes in, and tying it all together. So taking the perspectives of this university, taking my academic research, taking what makes Gunnison special, and tying it all together and creating a new learning opportunity. So this is one of those. I thought it was fitting to start with a quote. This land is made for you and me. One line or one set of lines from it. Like I said, I grew up playing on public lands. I grew up playing outside with a deep, just emotional connection to land and what it offers. So this quote meant a lot, but it also just kind of sums up how we view public lands and kind of how that's starting to change and how it will change in the coming decades. First, who am I? Let's take a couple steps back. Like I said, I'm coming from Western State Colorado University in Gunnison. I'm an adjunct faculty there. I teach in the Environment and Sustainability Department. I also teach in the Sociology Department, teach environmental sociology. In addition to that, I'm the Resilience Studies Consortium Coordinator. And so my role here is to tie together all these universities that we're working with as we're talking about environmentalism and environmental movement in the coming decades. What does that mean? What can we learn from each other? And what do each of the universities that we partner with offer each other that is truly unique? So I want to go into what the RSC means a little bit, and then we'll start diving into my research and the neoliberal connection to public lands. So, a lot of text here, let's go over it real fast. The Resilience Studies Consortium seeks to utilize a nationwide network of universities in order to advance place-based educational opportunities for undergraduate students from a diversity of backgrounds and passions. By sharing academic resources, allowing for a transferability between partner universities, and creating pathways to a better understanding of community resilience in the coming era, the RSC seeks to engage and empower students with rich environmental understanding. The idea here is the environmental movement really took off in the 70s, and they did a lot of great things. However, the leadership often was older Caucasian males who had the best of intentions, created public lands, set aside land for us to go to, helped with animal habitat, created the most powerful environmental laws that we still have on the books today. But in the coming decades, that's changing. Our society is changing, our needs are changing. And an interest of the RSC is really looking at what are the new needs that we need? What does the new environmental movement look like? And how do we all have a voice in it? So part of that is partnering with universities, figuring out what are the things that are going to be required of our public lands and our environment in the coming decades. Some of the core values that we have in the RSC are place. What does a place allow us to learn? How does it allow us to learn? In Western Colorado, we're looking at water law, we're looking at water rights, we're looking at the intersection of conservation of land and ranching and farming. We're looking at endangered species issues. We're working with the University in Chicago that's looking at environmental justice issues in an urban area. We work at a university that is a Christian Science university that ties together Christianity and environmental attitudes. So we're looking at how we can all inform each other, how we can take the environmental movement and the academic theory behind it to a new level by incorporating all of our perspectives. And the place that we learn is a big part of that. Looking at choice, being able to offer people within the RSC an opportunity to learn from another university. What perspective are you missing? And how can another partner university expand what you're learning right here? Diversity, and I think this is the big one. Our needs are changing, the environmental movement is changing. And how can we all have a voice in it and make sure that the new environmental movement, the new resiliency movement, incorporates our needs, our thoughts. And finally, recruitment, making sure that the new environmental movement represents what our society is, not what it used to be, making sure that all these new perspectives are brought into the fold. So that's the RSC, and I coordinate this with partnership with 6 universities. In addition, I teach, and I have my own academic research that I'm going to talk about today, but I'm also going to tie it into the perspective that this university offers to the RSC. But first, who am I? Again, not just in addition to my jobs that I do. This fuels a lot of what I've researched. A lot of my academic passions come from my passions in the outdoors. I've always been a lover of the outdoors. When I was younger, my mother early on gave me an opportunity, a choice to either keep going to church or not. And I chose, I'm just not going to go to church anymore. And I just started sitting around on Sunday not doing anything. And my dad saw that, and he had always taken me hiking and backpacking. He said, we can't do that, you have to do something. And Sunday for me as a child, as a young teenager, became this day where we went outside. We went hiking, we went biking. It became this day of worship outside. From that, I developed a very strong connection to being outside and sharing it with others from my father. It's inspired me to do a lot of things. I've cycled from the very top of Alaska and Prudhoe Bay all the way down to Costa Rica over a large part of a year. On a regular basis, I climb and ski in the backcountry, going to the highest peaks in Alaska, going to the highest peaks in Mexico to climb. I'm a climber, backcountry skier, and all that is born out of a passion. My passion for the ground, what we can do here on Earth in our public lands. I keep saying public lands, and I want to take a moment to actually explain what I mean by public lands. This definition is pretty simple, but I think it says a lot. Public lands are areas set aside by the American people for a variety of purposes. The public entrusts state and federal agencies to regulate and protect these lands. We trust a state agency to manage this land for a variety of different purposes. The rules of what you can and cannot do on these lands differ according to the regulating agency. Pretty simple definition of public land. When we think of public land, this is, I think, what pops up in most people's mind. Who's been to Yosemite before? If you ever get the chance, go. I spent 6.5 years living and working in Yosemite. It was probably my favorite place I think I'll ever live. And it means a lot to me, not only because it's the birthplace of this idea of national parks and setting aside land, John Muir, giant glaciers, waterfalls, and giant sequoias, but also it's just a very spiritual place. And if you've ever been there, when you go there, I think you'll understand what I mean. So when we say public lands, this is what a lot of people think of. The idea of mining or doing any destructive resource extraction in a place like this is something that you wouldn't think of doing because it's sacred. Public lands also look like this. Rivers. This is a wild and scenic river that people raft, people recreate on, people go hiking around there. It's just another form of public land managed by a different agency. But in addition to kind of these postcard parks, in addition to rivers that are wild and scenic, you have public lands that are like that, which actually the vast majority of public land is desert in the Southwest. Do these areas have equal value? It's a big part of what I'm looking at how we value land and how our idea of land and the value it holds for us changes as our society changes as our needs and expectations of it changes. And I'm really looking at what do we do with this land? How do we use it? And what do we think is okay? So, when I say public lands, I'm talking about everything from Yosemite Valley to BLM land in Utah. So, kind of find out what the middle ground between those two looks like in your head. And that's what I'll be talking about when I say public lands. Now, my personal research, I'm coming from just about 10 years of being an educator. The vast majority of the time, I worked with students. I worked as an outdoor educator, an environmental educator in Yosemite National Park, with students who came from San Francisco, from LA, from all over the Central Valley, Stockton, Fresno, Visalia, a lot of Hmong and Hispanic students. And I got to bring them to a place, Yosemite, and they would stay there for about a week. And I'd take them hiking, we'd take them backpacking, skiing. We'd talk about the science of the place. We'd talk about watershed and how water flows down and grows the crops that we eat. We'd do water quality monitoring. And we wanted to connect them with the science, the ecology, as well as a spiritual connection, an emotional connection to the land. And the idea is creating future environmental stewards. Children are the future, we keep saying, and if they don't connect with our public lands, they're not supporters of them in the future. And that was our big thing, nurturing future environmental stewards. And I really enjoyed that job. I loved being an educator. I loved being outside, not having to teach geology from a textbook, but instead being able to point at giant walls that were carved by a glacier. And that was geology in the realist sense. And I did this for a number of years, and I especially worked with some of our sister programs that connected with Hispanic and Hmong kids. And it was wonderful to have them for a week, connect them to a place, and you say goodbye at the end of the week and you tell them, please come back. And what I realized time and time again as I was teaching is that often in that act of waving goodbye, what I was telling them is, you're probably not going to come back here. We know that when you look at who visits public lands, who participates in outdoor recreation, it doesn't reflect the general population of the cities that we come from at all. If you ever go out and do backcountry things, you'll see that right away. And often I was sending these students back to communities that maybe didn't have the resources to get back to Yosemite, maybe didn't have the knowledge of what really public lands were or how close maybe they were to their own backyard. No 12-year-old kid is going to get on a bus by himself and go to Yosemite for the weekend. It just doesn't work. And when they ask their parents work 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs to support them. They don't have time to come up. So I realized after a few years that if I really wanted to connect the youth, if I believe that the youth is the future and I want to connect them to our public lands, I had to reach out to communities. I had to start working with communities and figure out how do you engage your underserved populations with the public lands that surround you. So I did a project with my master's degree looking at a specific population, the Hispanic community in Montrose, Colorado, a town on the western slope. How do you connect them with their public lands that literally surround the whole city? Through this project, I interviewed a lot of people, and I issued a set of recommendations to the city of Montrose. That I was at a conference last week and a conference before that, and they're starting to carry out some of these things, which is phenomenal to see these actions being implemented. So the issue that I'm looking at through my academic research is this idea of lack of diverse visitation to public lands. And in my mind, if people don't go to a place, they don't understand a place. They don't understand its significance, its importance. And there's a lot of barriers to visitation that previous research has looked at. Everything from lack of resources, whether it's time or financial resources, transportation, reliable transportation options, lack of knowledge of public lands, and this big one here is cultural relevancy. When we talk about public lands, how does that connect with a person and their culture? And I was really interested in, as we have a diversifying cultural landscape in the United States, what is that cultural connection to public lands? Is it eroding over time? How can we make it stronger? What are those meaningful connections that we can find? That's been a lot of my interest the past few years. I issued a set of recommendations to the city of Montrose, and what I recommended isn't necessarily that important. The idea here is it was a way to connect a community to their land. As a resident living in this land, this country, we have access to all these public lands, and that's an amazing treasure. And the joy they offer us, the spiritual awakening, the power they give us, as well as the resources that they give us, is important. And an understanding of all those things that we get from land really informs down the road how we view the land. So, again, with the RSC, the speaker series, I'm really trying to tie together what each university offers. The Evergreen State College Tacoma has this amazing perspective of neoliberalism in the neighborhood, looking at market policies, looking at the neoliberal perspective and how it shapes everything in our own backyard, how it creates systems that we live in, and kind of how those systems often oppress us in certain ways. And while neoliberalism is not my research background, it's something that fascinates me. It's exciting. My passion is public lands. My passion is who goes to public lands and how do we use public lands. So I'm tying together the neoliberal perspective with our use of public lands. And here's the issue. Changing demographics in the US, especially among the Hispanic population and other minority groups, will play a pivotal role in how we view public lands and their management. Coupled to this is the neoliberal push for privatization of public lands, for resource extraction, and the subsequent attractiveness of well-paying blue-collar jobs. So, kind of builds on itself there. And my question, the one that I want to talk about during this presentation, and that I can't give you any answers, but I hope that you leave with a couple more questions instead, is how will a changing demographic, often with traditionally lower than average socioeconomic educational levels, respond to such pressures? So we're going to go into that a little bit, and I'm going to frame it in a way that hopefully makes sense and hopefully allows you in your own minds to think about the issue, how do we connect to our public lands? And how will our children's children connect to public lands? What are we going to need from them? Again, we're tying neoliberalism into this. When I did my research, I wasn't necessarily using this framework, but I want to go over what neoliberalism is one more time, just so I can see how I'm going to tie it in, and really look at the tenets that I'm going to tie into it. Some main points of neoliberalism: the rule of the market. So liberating free enterprise or private enterprise from any bonds imposed by the government, the state, no matter how much social damage this causes. Cutting public expenditure for social services like education and, well, healthcare. Deregulation, reduce government regulation of everything that could diminish profits, including protecting the environment and safety on the job. Privatization, sell state-owned enterprises, goods, services, and property to private investors. And eliminating the concept of the public good or community and replacing it with individual responsibility. What I'm looking at when I look at public lands and our use of them, it's really just three of them here. It's the rule of the market. Market pressures dictating what we allow. Deregulation, reducing regulation at a federal level, allowing us to do what we please, how we please. And privatization, this idea of taking what once was a public land and transferring it to private control. So those are the three things that I'm really going to look at. And I'll dive into the other ones just a little bit. So as I go through this, it's really helpful for me. Something that I learned is the 3 Ps perspective. Has anybody ever heard of the 3 Ps or triple bottom line thinking? It's something that was introduced for corporate sustainability. This idea that as corporations are trying to do things that are better for the world, often they look at the actions they take, the things they sell, the way they manufacture, the resources that they use, and they look at it through 3 perspectives. People, is it socially equitable? Planet, is it good for the ground? Is it good for the land? And profit, does it make money? When you tie all those things together, when we talk about sustainability, sustainability really is those 3 things: people, planet, profit. And while I'm not talking from a business or corporate standpoint, it's still really helpful for me to frame these thoughts into the 3 Ps. So I'll work through the 3 Ps of this issue and tie it all together in the end. So people, planet, profit. And if you're interested in the 3 Ps perspective or triple bottom line thinking, look it up online. It's a really great way in my mind to frame any issue. So it's a great way to frame papers. It's a great way to look at an issue, look at a book, look at a problem, and think about solutions in a way that address all the needs. So triple Ps of the issue, the people. I'm coming from a Hispanic background. I grew up on the border. Grew up in El Paso, Texas, where I could literally see Mexico just right over the hill. It wasn't like a Sarah Palin kind of thing where she's like, oh, Russia's over there somewhere. Like, I literally grew up on the border. This was my community that I grew up around. Are you from there? No way. Where'd you go to school? Oh my God, that's where my dad went. That's wonderful. I spent a lot of time in El Paso. Went to college in El Paso. And so that's my community that I'm coming from. And I realized from a very early age that when I went out and I did things, I grew up mountain biking, I backcountry ski, I climb, I do all these things. I realized that when I was out there doing those things, often my friends who I was doing them with didn't look like me. There isn't a lot of color in the backcountry. But it's what I love to do. Those are my friends. Those are the people I connected with when I was out in the backcountry doing these things. So I assumed, they're my friends, whatever. And then I realized early on, oh my God, I actually am the only person of color out here all the time. And I realized, one, this is slightly troubling, but two, I have a lot of power. And that's where I started getting into environmental education. That's where I started talking about this issue. And that's why I want to start with the people, because this is my background. Granted, I'm just talking about the Hispanic background. This could be applied to any underrepresented community. When I say the people, I'm talking about families. I'm talking about multiple generations. From your grandpa to your family to your children. How we as a community are growing and how that connection might change in the future. So real quick, a map that I think everybody has probably seen before, some form or iteration of it. This is the Hispanic or Latino population based on the 2010 census. And the main thing to take away from here is areas that are darker blue are 50 to 99% Hispanic. Again, you would expect to see it on the border. The parts that once used to be Mexico and all that. So I don't think this is surprising at all. It just gives us an idea based on 2010 census where people of Hispanic background lived. This is where it starts to get interesting, and this is where I get excited about how attitudes change. This is looking at the Hispanic population growth from 1970, 9.6 million, to now, 55.5 million. That's a rapid growth. Hispanic population is the fastest growing demographic in the United States. And that means so much. That restructures how we think about the public good. That thinks about how we think about cities. How we think about everything from education to criminal law is affected by a growing population that's growing that quickly. And it's amazing to be a part of that community, and also really empowering to realize that a growing minority can influence meaningful change. And that's my interest. Again, putting it more into perspective with more pictures. The U.S. Hispanic population, this is percent change. So how much we're changing the populations, how quickly the Hispanic community is growing in certain parts of the country. You start to see the Hispanic community growing very rapidly, 100% increase or more in these areas that are progressively darker red. So again, the population is growing and in new areas. An infographic that I think is really useful for a couple things. Hispanic community, 56% of the population growth from 2000 to 2010. 1 trillion in buying power. So again, the power that we have as a community. 1 in every 6 individuals is self-identifying Hispanic. What's even more interesting and more powerful here is 1 in every 4 children. That means the future, those under 18, a quarter are coming from a Hispanic background. That's a vastly growing community that, while they are not all the same, I'm not saying that all people of Hispanic background are the same, there is a certain amount of power in what change that can bring. One more graphic that kind of ties it all together, I think. The percentage of the population coming from different ethnicities. Just going to today, last year, 2015, Caucasian, right above 60% of the population. I think if we live in highly dense urban areas that are fairly diverse, we see this. I don't see it so much in Colorado. I live in a different part of the state. Hispanic population, approaching about 16, 17, 18% nowadays. That's normal. And then other populations, Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, people identified as biracial, Black, and American Indian, and Alaska Native. What's interesting here is as we move forward in time from 2015 to 2045, what you notice here is the Hispanic slice of the pie got bigger, is projected to get bigger. The Asian slice of the pie is projected to get bigger. People identifying as biracial also getting bigger. African American community staying about the same, but also increasing ever so slightly. What this means is this whole pie, this demographic pie, is becoming increasingly diverse. And when you diversify something, you change perspectives, you change needs and expectations. And I'm very interested in what this means for our public lands. Census 2012 projected that Hispanic population is projected to account for 30% of the population by 2050. So keep that in mind, 30%. How does that 30% view the land that we come from? Now coupled to that, so keep that in mind, that we have on one hand a population that's growing rapidly. It's becoming more prevalent, more visible in our society. Let's think about education and poverty for a moment. And let's think about where these people live and what they're doing. If we look at the national average here for poverty rates in the United States, we're, 15% living at or below the poverty line. I think the fact that we're at 15% is an abysmal problem in itself, and that's something for a whole nother lecture. But let's just think about that benchmark right now. 15% of us live at or below the poverty line. This is something that we all see every day. Let's look at now if you separate it into different ethnicities. Ignoring for a fact that this graph doesn't talk about the difference between men and women, children living in poverty, different parts of the country, urban versus rural. Let's simplify it just by ethnicity. We'll start at the bottom here with people identifying as Caucasian. About 9.6% living in poverty. I would argue even that is way too high. But that's on the low end when you divide by ethnicity. Right above it, right at about 10.5, is the Asian community. 10.5% living at or below the poverty line. Average, about 15%. But let's go up here, because this is what's troubling. And this is something that I think we all know, something that we all see. Purple line is the Latino or Hispanic community. 23.5 living at or below the poverty line. Almost a quarter living in conditions that we have decided is not adequate. How? Why does that happen? It's for another discussion, but I think it's important just to paint the picture of where we're at. You go up here, 27.2% of the African American community living at or below the poverty line. Again, abysmal, should not happen, but it's where we're at right now. And I think knowing that this percentage of our population lives at a level that we don't think is adequate, really, when you're living here, you're not presented with a lot of choices. You're not presented with a lot of meaningful opportunities. Money allows you and your family to survive. And I think that's crucial for the rest of this discussion, is to remember that when you're in this situation, you kind of have to do what you have to do to get by. And sometimes that has consequences down the road that we don't want to think about. Let's go into the people just a little bit more. Again, painting a picture of where we're at. This is looking at college enrollment rate. So this is looking at everybody between the ages of 18 and 24, which we call that traditional college age. What percentage of that population, the 18 to 24-year-olds, is enrolled in some sort of 2 to 4 year higher educational institution? We'll start on this end here. Caucasian population, 43%. So not quite half are engaged in some sort of higher learning. Again, I would argue that's way too low, but that's where it is. Coming from the Asian background, 62%. So actually doing very well. Going down this way, 38% identified as African American are enrolled in some sort of higher education between the ages of 18 and 24. That's actually a good number. And this is 32% of Hispanic youth enrolled in some sort of higher education. I think this is important to bring up because it's, I think, highly tied to this right here. Poverty and education are linked. We've known that, we've studied that, we've looked at all the data. And still, even in this day and age, we still have, from some segments of our population, just less than a third who are given the opportunity to attend college. And not attending college has effects down the road. It affects the choices you have for a job, for a career. It affects how you're going to raise your family. And I would argue it affects your choice in whether or not you think the job you're taking is meaningful, whether or not it is good for the planet we live on. Sometimes those choices are beyond our control. So that's the people perspective. Again, let's recap. The Hispanic population in the US, who traditionally have higher than average poverty rates and lower college attainment rates, is also the fastest growing segment of our population. There's a lot of power for change in that statistic right there. Also, very troubling. I come from that background. I don't want people I know, people I came from, to be a statistic. I want something different. And this is the question that I ask myself. What will this growing demographic require of their public lands? Going back to everything from Yosemite to those deserts that hold resources under the soil. What does a changing and growing demographic need from the planet? So that's the people. And how does the neoliberal agenda inform how people view public lands? We talked about privatization, deregulation. How does that inform our extraction of things from the earth? And we'll come back to that in just a moment. Moving on from the people, we go to the planet. So we go from people, culture, society, attitudes, how we think and talk about things, to the things that we're talking about. In this case, the land, the resources beneath the soil, and the effects that it has on the place. This is, I don't know where this photo is from. I think it's from somewhere in Western Slope, Colorado, or a similar environment. This is basically the after effects of resource extraction, particularly fracking in an area. These are all test sites. Some of them were drilled and successfully found resources. They pulled it out of the ground, they moved on. This is a bird's eye view of what happens when we use resources. And I'm not standing up here saying don't use resources, because we're here with lights. We're here in a climate-controlled building. We don't have to be sitting out in the rain naked. We use things all the time. And that's powerful. That's really important and critical. But I think really important is also thinking about the awareness of what we use, why we use it, and the rate at which we consume these things. We can't get rid of things. We'll always need them. But we can change how we use them. Because if we don't, if we just allow ourselves to just willy-nilly use resources, this is the effects of using resources each and every day. I am as guilty for this as everybody else in this room, but I would hope that down the road we can have a choice in how we use it and where we use it. So, this is the planet. We're going to focus on the physical for a moment. I keep talking about public lands. We showed a couple slides looking at the variety of different public lands. This is a map of where they are in the United States. So immediately, something that pops up for most people is they're all over the American West. The American West has the vast majority of our public lands. A lot of that had to do with how we moved westward when we were settling this continent, for lack of a better word. And we viewed the West as this area that was expansive and limitless. There was so much land we would never use it all. So we were able to set aside huge, monumental, unprecedented tracts of land just for the sake of having land. So that's what this created. Also, looking at here, federal public lands, surface and subsurface. When we talk about public lands, we're not just talking about the mountain that you're climbing on, the meadow that you're sitting in. We're talking about the soil. We're talking about the water table. We're talking about the resources beneath the surface. And those things are the ones that we fight over, that we have wars over. Also the things that power our cities, power our cars. So surface and subsurface public lands in the American West. This graphic does a good job of showing what percentage of each state is public land. So again, we know from the previous slide that the American West has the vast majority of our public lands. What you see here is you have states like Nevada, 85% public land. A lot of it is because there's a lot of areas in Nevada where you just wouldn't want to live. It's desert, there's not much going on. So we can set aside large portions for the public good. We'll call it that for now. I'm coming from Texas, we only have 2% public land. We're very much into like, Texas, strong, republic, like this is our land, nobody's gonna take it, so we're gonna own it all. So that leaves us with 2% public land. I taught California for a long time, 45% public land, pretty impressive. Up here, 30%, that's also very impressive. These public lands offer a lot of different things. It's not just hiking, it's not just fishing or going in your boat or camping with your family or having a picnic. It's lumber, it's resources like silver, gold, copper, oil, all these things that we need to survive. And how we extract them is super important for these conversations. Earlier I mentioned we turn over control of our public lands to these regulating agencies. These land management agencies get to decide, for the most part, how we use land. They take care of it, they staff it, they put people on the ground like park rangers. They manage the resources, count how many different species of animals there are. They do all the hard work on the ground. These are the three main agencies that I tend to think of. There's a few other ones, But these three kind of control the vast majority of our public lands. We have the Forest Service, and it's really important to look at the details, devil's in the details, under the Department of Agriculture. That's super important. The BLM, U.S. Department of the Interior, manages the Bureau of Land Management. Management of land for a variety of different purposes. And then we have the National Park Service, also a part of the Department of the Interior. Park Service is the one that everybody knows about. They manage Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, all the things that we drive for, go on our classic American road trips to go visit. These two tend to have lesser known public lands, but for this discussion, way more important. Because Park Service, nobody's gonna go mine in Yosemite. Nobody's gonna go dig up the Grand Canyon. It's illegal. We've decided that that agency is gonna manage land for preservation, keeping it the way it always has been. The other end of that is conservation. So that's what I really want to focus on. Difference between preservation and conservation. If I have this water here, if I'm going to preserve it, I'm not going to drink any of it. I want it to remain exactly like it is. However, these two agencies, BLM and Forest Service, we've allowed them to conserve our public lands, using this resource, in this case my water, in a responsible and sustainable way. I would still drink the water, I just wouldn't waste it. That's what the BLM, that's what the Forest Service is trying to do. How do we manage these places? The greatest good for the greatest number of people is often said for the Forest Service. Public lands, are they for all? Are you all familiar with the Bundy occupation of the wildlife refuge? It's a big issue. While I'm not necessarily falling on that side of the issue, this all comes together. This idea that we're now questioning, really, what are public lands for? If you're going to say they're public, why are you going to charge me to graze on them? And on the other end of that, we have people who are saying, especially from the neoliberal perspective, we should get rid of public lands. We should turn them over to private interests because private interests operate on the market. And if we are the market, that's us getting to decide how to best use the land. So there's been a lot of issues with raising this possibility of selling off public lands, transferring them to state control, in order to more efficiently use them, is the argument. And so this is becoming a conversation that we're hearing about more and more. How do we manage our public lands? And is it really public lands for all if we can't use it for the resources that we need? These are the arguments that are starting to bubble up. I think this quote here, this definition, really sums up how the neoliberal perspective views public land. So it's worth going through. In essence, the argument for disposal of public lands is this. Each person knows what is best for him or her, and therefore, the best system is the one that permits the real preferences of individuals to be revealed and implemented. With rare exceptions, the ideal mechanism for implementing these preferences is a private marketplace where each individual expresses his or her desires through bidding. Private ownership advances this goal, and public ownership impedes it. So what they're saying here essentially is, by making the land public, you're not allowing people to manage it and use it in the most efficient, profitable way. If you privatize it, then people have true ownership over it, and people are going to make a lot of money. So, this is the neoliberal perspective on public land. These are the pressures that I was talking about when I brought up that issue. These are the pressures that a changing demographic is coming up against. So there's people, there's planet. The issue that I'm really focused on, the way that we're extracting a lot of these resources, is all centered around this technology. Hydraulic fracturing, commonly known as fracking. Have you all heard of fracking before? It's something that I think we all hear about a lot. And it's a process that's been around for a while. Traditionally, it was used so that we could extract oil from places that we had previously gone to drill, had gotten what we could with the current technologies, and left a little behind. Fracking was able to go in, using new drilling techniques, send water in, and then extract the last little bits. Now it's becoming a technique that we just use on its own to extract the last little bit of oil from these lands. I showed you that image earlier of all those little dots on the landscape. That's the bird's eye view of the damage caused by fracking. Fracking is also attractive because it's kind of cheap. So it's becoming this new method that has huge ecological impacts on our public lands. Of course, we need the oil, so we'll move on from there, but just think about it, we still need the oil. Fracking has a lot of environmental impacts. We hear about a lot of these. I'm sure you all have seen the YouTube videos of people turning on their water faucet and their water catches on fire. We're having leakage into people's water supplies. People can't drink the water in their communities because of the impacts of fracking. We have methane escaping into the atmosphere, methane being one of the worst gases for greenhouse gases, one of the worst gases contributing to climate change, coming from fracking. We have all this horrible implementation of technologies, impact on the land, roads, spills from traffic. We have leakage going on down here, leakage going on up here, leakage up in the atmosphere. Fracking is not clean, but it's becoming very popular because it's highly efficient, and it's attractive for that reason. So, the planet perspective, again, to wrap it up, public lands, which cover a large portion of the American West, are facing increasing pressure from neoliberal market forces to become privatized through the process of transferring land control to state governments, going from federal to state. Once under state management, land can be leased for resource extraction with far less input than if the land were under federal control. So you're taking what was, say, BLM, Forest Service land, turning it over to the state of, say, Colorado. And now because it's state land, there's a lot less input in how it gets used. There's not the same checks and balances at the state level versus the federal. So all of a sudden the land can be sold off to, in essence, the highest bidder. That's neoliberalism, I think, at its heart, is privatization through those mechanisms. So the neoliberal perspective, how would it view the extraction of resources and the ecological effects on public lands? I think in a lot of ways they would say that's the cost of doing business. And a solution will present itself when it's necessary. But until then, let the market dictate how we pull land and how we pull resources and how we view public lands. So this is the planet perspective. We've gone from people, gone to planet. And finally, we have profit. And I think this graph, or this picture, really sums it up very well. This idea of buried opportunity. When we talk about fracking, we talk about resource extraction, especially in communities that are struggling in some ways, rural communities where there's not a lot of other industry. Fracking and other resource extraction is thought of as a no-brainer. It's pitched and sold as a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you frack? Why wouldn't you engage in this thing that's going to give you and your family money? These are well-paying jobs for people who don't have master's degrees in the arts. Of course you're going to do it because your family needs money. This is what people are being told. This is how it's being sold to communities. And I'm arguing that this has long-lasting impacts that far outweigh the short-term gain. Buried opportunity. People hear job opportunities. Fracking industry, resource extraction companies come into town. All of a sudden, they're promoting themselves as a way for the town to get itself up, to take care of itself. Let's make jobs, let's build a community center, let's have a library, all because of resource extraction. People hear that and it's very attractive. You can imagine if you're in that situation and you're one of those people, one of those statistics living at or below the poverty line, a good paying job is a great thing in the moment. These statistics are from the oil industry. Again, it's really important to know where your data is coming from, so look at where it's coming from. But according to them, they're saying that growth in oil and gas employment outpaces the rest of the economy. So right now, people are doing this. People are jumping on the resource extraction bandwagon because these jobs are popping up all over the western US. They're popping up in new places all over, and it's an easy job, and you can make very good money doing it. So that's why jobs increase. I thought this was really, really interesting. Again, coming from more the petro industry, these are projections for who's going to work in this industry. This is what the analysts and the companies really want to know. Who are our future employees? And this is what they're projecting. From 2015 to 2035, there will be almost 2 million new jobs in resource extraction. Again, a very quickly growing industry. But then, specifically in this graph, they break it down. They're really looking at, of that 2 million, 700 to 6,000 is projected to come from what we would call a minority community, minority population. 290,000, almost 300,000 are projected to be women entering this workforce. What they're realizing is you have communities that don't have college levels at the rate of the rest of society, and it's taking advantage of a group that almost doesn't have another choice. I think that's neoliberalism, again, at its heart. Using a labor force that you purposely don't educate so that you can have these, short-term jobs, and it's treated as a disposable economy. And it's a very, very, very scary prospect to go down that road. But in the short term, it's a very attractive one. So these are projections for regions, Pacific, mountains, North Central Coast, all that. But this is the big number here, is looking at, from the petro industry, how much of their workforce they project to come from these backgrounds. Again, they're assuming it's going to happen. And this is the propaganda that we get from the neoliberal perspective. Neoliberal perspective tells us that these are jobs. The market gives us the economy that we need. You hear this all the time. This is actually a bumper sticker that you'll find. Want jobs? Frack, baby, frack. If you want your community to be better, allow this industry to move in so that you can pay for all the things you need. Buy local, fracking. It does the state good. There's certain sections of Colorado that are absolutely pro-fracking because people now have a home. People are sending their kids to college, at least for the next 5 or 10 years. You see this, a lot of billboards around too. Safe natural gas equals jobs for northern Michigan. So again, reaching out to people and saying, this is a legitimate job, please do it. Better yourself, and don't ask too many questions about the impacts down the road. So, let's sum up the profit perspective. Fracking and other methods of resource extraction are being advertised as legitimate and well-paying blue-collar job opportunities for those with less educational attainment. So again, if you don't have, say, a master's in the arts, and you need to make money to support your family, fracking is being advertised as that way to make money, that way to support your family. I would argue that's a very scary proposition, a very scary road to start going down. So bringing it back, how will a changing demographic, often with traditionally lower than average socioeconomic educational levels, respond to such pressures? What will be the response when these industries move into different communities and say, this is an economic opportunity, take it. Frack your lands, they're public lands, they should be used for maximum efficiency, and you're gonna have a well-paying job, do it. People naturally respond to this in a way that we would expect. They say, okay, it's a job, I'll take it. And again, that's a very scary road to go down, but it's the road that we're going down in a lot of ways. How do we balance the emergent needs of a rapidly growing and changing cultural landscape? As our communities change, our expectations of public lands change. And how do we balance that? Our need for resources with our need for preserving these places that we've decided need to be set aside. So what can be done? I don't want to end it on gloom and doom because things are being done. I'm part of that movement, and all of us in this room are also part of this movement. On one end, we have organizations like ECHO, which is Hispanics Enjoying Camping, Hunting, and the Outdoors, that help with policy, connecting communities to their land through policy. We have groups like Latino Outdoors, which I work with, which takes people from communities on hikes on Saturdays, connecting communities with their land. There's a lot of academic research. Mine is only just a small fraction of what's going on how you connect different communities with their land, how you find meaningful cultural connections to forests, parks, rivers, and how that creates future environmental stewards down the road. And you have things like this coming out in multiple languages, really reaching out to people on a cultural level, not just saying, we're the National Park Service, please come for a hike. Instead, thinking about what are the needs that you have and how can public lands fill those needs. So a few questions to consider as we move forward. I'm quickly approaching the time that I have, and you're going to break up into groups and you're going to discuss other stuff in your specific classes. But these are some questions to move forward with it. Again, I'm coming from public lands, recreating on them, using them for natural resources, two different uses of the same place. And I'm really interested in how our society changes and how our perception of what that land offers us changes as well. And what we gain from that. Is it jobs or is it more of an emotional connection? So is the neoliberal perspective the only one that might allow for such use of our public lands and their resources? What other populations were left out of this issue? Again, I really focused on the Hispanic population because that's where my research comes from, that's where I come from. But this could be extended to any other group. And it'd be very fascinating to take this to other communities and think about how it applies or whether it applies. How might their inclusion change our thinking of the issue? And this one is fascinating down here. When we look at neoliberalism and we talk about market pressures, neoliberal perspective doesn't necessarily think green technology is a bad thing. They're interested in the economic benefit of it. So how might renewable energy technologies be viewed by the neoliberal perspective? How would they view this emerging market? Let's call it that. And what might this mean for the future of traditional energy sources versus alternative opportunities? So we're seeing neoliberal things, the agenda, the propaganda propping up all the time. It's a central focus of this class, this block that you're in, and I tie it to public lands because that's my interest. So as we move forward, as you move forward in this class, in the semester, apply it kind of outside the box. In the neighborhood, neoliberalism in the neighborhood is a great way of framing it. Take it to public lands. Take it to all the different levels that you can and all the different scales, and you really start to see it being implemented systematically throughout. So, that is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Now we would like to turn to questions and some discussion with the professor. So let me see if there are any questions that you all have.
Check, check, check.
Daryl, yes.
Hello? So, with your research, what would be, in your mind, what would be a sweet spot for what you would like to see with public lands in its efficiency? How does that equate to what do you want to see happen, like in your mind? What was your greatest fantasy? How could that be profitable for everybody?
So I guess tying into my research, I was really looking at how people from underserved communities connect with their public lands. And I realized that, I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen the websites and all that about like, oh, camping is something that white people do. And like, I think we've all heard that in one form or another. So I don't necessarily need to see, I don't need to go backcountry skiing and see everybody come from a Hispanic background. That's not as important to me as just the knowledge that people know that coming from this place, coming from this country, that the public land is ours. You don't have to go to it, just an understanding that we have a say in what happens on it. So, I don't know if that quite answers your question. I just want to know that as we grow up in the society that we know that the land belongs to us just as much as other people who have traditionally used it. Yeah.
Stephanie.
Thanks. Okay, so I really like going to national parks and I like being outdoors. I don't go very often, especially out here, because of the places I have to travel to get to those parks, where they have felt I've had very dangerous experiences, or a lot of hostility toward me. And so I'm just curious, I didn't see that as an obstacle on your list of obstacles to accessing public land, so I'm just curious if that's something that you've also seen communities or other individuals experience.
I have, and I'm glad you brought that up. I kind of lump that in my mind under cultural relevancy, though I realize that the safety issue is something that's very different. A lot of people don't feel safe in these places, and I think historically, especially in the African American community in the South, and this is taking it to its very dark roots, but the woods were a very scary place. That's where horrible shit happened. And that continues, that thought still continues. Now, that wasn't a long time ago. And in doing research, that pops up. That's a legitimate theory of why people from different communities don't go outside. And those are the discussions that we have to get past, not get past, we have to acknowledge the reality of it. And we have to work with these agencies that manage the land to make these places safe again. And a lot of that comes from, when you go to these places, people who are in uniform, do they look like you or do they look like somebody else? And a lot of times if we see people who look like us in these places, we feel welcome. We feel like it's our place, not a place that we're visiting that belongs to somebody else. So I'm really involved in efforts to diversify the workforce in a way to make everybody feel welcome. But yeah, that comfort in a place is very important. Thanks.
My question is kind of around, if they're going into certain communities that are considered low-income communities, what would be the fight to tell that community not to frack or not to take care of their family? What is the option to that?
I think in a word, it's education. I think because education allows freedom, allows opportunity, allows you to choose your future versus having it dictated for you. And lack of education forces you to stay in this one track where you're going to get whatever job pays the most. And the attractiveness of these jobs becomes more and more attractive. Education gives you freedom to choose other paths that are possible. So I would say education is like the key. If we can educate a workforce, we allow them to have choice in the work that they do. And they can then make choices and say, that is not meaningful work or that is not proper work. And this is what I want to do instead. So, yeah, education.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask is, in thinking about the job creation and the graph that the industry shows about the number of jobs it will have, 2 million some jobs, and the places that they'll come from and the folks that they'll be given. One of the things that I've studied is automation and the role of technology in eliminating, reducing, and replacing human labor. And we see that in the mines of Australia, which is the cutting edge of automated resources extraction. We're seeing fewer and fewer people in the mines. And on one hand, that's great in that it reduces the number of people hurt in mines, but at the same time, it reduces the number of jobs and thus kind of deflates the promises that they're making. So I'm wondering, Andres, if you have, if they address automation as part of this, and if you've looked into that the aspect of technology and job creation with regards to fracking and other forms of resource extraction.
So I haven't really gone into the robotics side of things, but the automation side of things is, I mean, the way the industry works is you don't move into a community, or I'll call it a piece of land. You don't move to a piece of land and set up a community there. You're there for the resources and you're going to move on. There's no long-lasting benefit. And as much as possible, the human force is seen as expendable. You can get that human labor force wherever you go. The machinery is the robots. That's the automation that we take with us from site to site. The people just do the manual labor, and then the job moves on. The automation moves on to a new piece of land. So in a lot of ways, you know, you extract, you move on, the automation moves on, and people are a disposable workforce a lot in this industry. Some people follow the industry from place to place. Other people are stuck in the community that it is now left in this crisis. So, hope I answered that.
Thank you.
Hi, this is just kind of going off of the previous response. I was just, I mean, and I know it's ideal to see the actual consortium growing. You said there's 6 colleges or universities. Do you have any idea, or do you guys plan to expand with that?
So expanding the consortium, the RSC, from what it is right now, yeah, this is our first year, so we are 2 months into it, so it's brand new. This is in its toddler stage. So we reached out to the networks that we're connected with through my old advisor, John Hausdorfer. Mr. Zaragoza are good friends. So we reached out to people that we knew coming from universities that have unique perspectives, and I want to move it forward from there. We don't have a university, say, on our network who is really engaged with the Hispanic community and environmental justice issues surrounding that community. So I'd love to find a small university on the border that really focuses on that and add that perspective in. We have one that's, you know, looks at Christian Science and environmentalism, which I think is a fascinating perspective. I'm interested in moving it forward in the next couple of years so that it's not just the 6, but for now, the 6 is what we have, and we're just trying to really push what is unique about each place. And so that's part of my job as well, is I'm around for a while today, this evening, and then in my job you can reach me via email, which we can connect with. This video would be made available to you. But I'm interested in what are the perspectives that this university, this program, as wonderful as it is, what are the perspectives you're missing? What are you interested in? Are you interested in endangered species stuff? Are you interested in that Christian Science and religion side? Are you interested in how we manage property and public lands? If you are and you think it'll add to your experience here, that's why the RSC exists. This is going to be shared with all the universities so that this neoliberal perspective will inform how people learn across the country at a different university. But I want it to go 2 ways. I want you to gain something from it because you're now part of this community. So as you go down the road through the semester, if you think, man, I really wish that we knew more about X, Y, or Z, you don't necessarily have to have the faculty that specializes in X, Y, and Z. That's the beauty of being a part of this network. So start thinking about, what is it that I'm missing? What would really round out my education here? That's why we exist. That's what my job is. Hearing from you all, connecting you with the professors, the lecture series at other universities that fill in all those gaps and really allow us all to exit with this well-rounded education.
Though this topic may be a little confusing for me, I really appreciate the idea of educating people. However, I feel, like you said, what was underrepresented, and that would be the Native American people in the southern and southwest. And I've had a lot of experience with the Bureau of Land Management and growing up on a reservation, seeing that struggle between the government and the Native American people trying to manage that land. And so I'm really interested in finding out what rights the Bureau has over the Native American land. And obviously there's been some pushback from the Native American people, and they have represented that land pretty well. They've preserved it pretty well. And I feel like they need to be represented in this whole thing.
And I totally agree. And I think when we talk about cultural connections to land, it doesn't get any more real than that. And that's one of the great things about being here in the Northwest, is that I think in a lot of ways we have different Native American communities in the Four Corners near us. Here, I mean, you have First Nations tribes everywhere that is a part of your culture. And I think that's something that we don't have in Colorado as much as you do. That's something that the knowledge you have of that issue here really informs how we learn in Colorado. So I don't have a lot of background in it, but I agree that it's critical when we start talking about cultural and emotional connections to land. And who gets to decide how much land we get or how we manage our land. Yeah, I agree, it's a constant struggle.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.